Yeah, and on that, can you remind me of a design sprint? And I had a conversation with another expert who was a guest, and it also really just reminds me of actually one of your posts that I absolutely loved, and it spoke to you were talking about the fact that people want to be able to connect their work to the impact and to the meaning and feel like they're part of something significant.
Mhm.
And that to them removes a lot of, I guess, a lot of hesitation and concern of whether they're doing the right thing and puts them in that state where they are more willing to contribute and are more open to sort of recognize that they're part of a broader system.
It's so true. I think people are very unique and our uniqueness comes out. And if we're just sitting on our computers, as much as I love AI, and I do, if it's not coming across, let me say that explicitly here. And I think it's a hugely positive thing for the humankind and for the universe. But if we just sit at our computers, create AI generated content, which is pretty generic, right? And write our emails with AI and do our work with AI, submit to the person, our manager, whoever it needs to be submitted to, and then they give their comments with AI, then it's just AI talking to each other and we become sort of the same, there's sameness. So I think we need to bring people together in corporate setting, leadership setting, and in general, right? In schools, I also think that I have young kids, so I'm very passionate about it also in education, where you need to bring people together. And as opposed to screens, we need to play with Legos and talk strategy. We don't need to just free play, even though that's good too. But have a theme, have something that you can bond over, that you can create over, and then that feeling also you bring back into the office and you bring to the computer. Humans need to communicate. It's so important. I do workshops where another recent one this summer that I had with a global team, and they've known each other for a while and they've worked together. But somebody said, in kind of a initially apprehensive way, but then they came out there and said, some of the people in this room used to scare me a lot. And now I'm not terrified anymore because they played together and they built together. They sat together, broke bread together, so to speak. They were able to create that psychological safety that didn't exist before. They only knew them from their emails before, from some short meeting where they were maybe feeling angry about something that didn't necessarily go according to plan. So we need those moments to take a step back and reflect and come together.
100%. We need those moments where we can meet each other and see each other and feel seen. And often I'm noticing in our, well, not just work environment, actually in our broader cultural environment, we sort of go from one thing to another and we forget to even sometimes introduce ourselves or understand better where the other person is or where they're at becomes very transactional. And I don't think anyone is satisfied with that dynamic. And maybe that's the reason why we ultimately all sort of crave that like quick, you know, boost of joy that comes through, feeling like we're solving something by just maybe scrolling or, clicking like on an ad or maybe purchasing something or maybe just doom scrolling really. It just gives us that satisfaction that we sort of actually lack during
Mhm.
our day to day because of the way our culture is. While you were talking about that example, my following question pops up is the fact that you led teams and you coached leaders across more than 20 countries. And now the technology and the AI tools promise to sort of erase the barriers and things like real time translation and cultural summaries, charts, or maps, and the tone analysis. They're all meant to make this global collaboration to feel seamless. But does seamless always mean better? Do these tools really help us understand each other, or do they perhaps risk flattening nuance and creating kind of sort of an algorithmic monoculture of communication that you actually referred to previously? If like, I read an email with AI and then someone replies and ultimately who's talking there? So from your experience, how can leaders use AI to connect without erasing the difference? And what are the new responsibilities that come with that power?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that that sameness is something to really think about, or that monoculture. I love that term as well. We don't want to create that. I think we kind of almost like cultural clashes, as long as they're healthy and as long as they're funny and as long as they kind of accentuate that difference, right? We want diversity. I think ultimately we see it in corporate, we see it in student teams, we see it in the world too. Ultimately, it's the diverse teams, diverse groups that perform the best. Now, in the short term, the more homogeneous, the more same, the higher the performance. But in the long term, which is what we want to plan for and which is what we want to think about if we are visionaries and if we are strategic about it, it's the diversity that wins. It's been scientifically studied, and I wholeheartedly believe that. Now, I think the tools and AI for sure, I think absolutely helps us. And it can almost be, I think of AI in general as an assistant, as a really good assistant. If you think about, for instance, presidents, or I don't know if you watch this show, if you're familiar with the show Veep, which I love, but the vice president, or then she becomes president anyway. So she has an assistant, right? So Gary always walks around with her, right? And then when she's about to shake people's hands, and you can imagine she's the president or the vice president of the United States, she shakes a lot of hands, that Gary just whispers in her ear, oh, well, Valerie lives in New York and you had met her at this thing and you want to check on her husband because he was sick before, that kind of thing. Or you want to, talking about cultural communication, this person is from Japan and you want to bow to them, but don't bow too low, don't bow too high, that kind of thing. Okay. So I think that's really helpful, right? So I think AI can be our Gary in that way. And I know a lot of clients who work globally and they work for global companies and they find themselves in global negotiation situations where before they travel to the country, they will ask their chat GPT really quick, okay, so what are some top line customs that I need to be aware of, or that I need to, maybe even employ or perform if I want this negotiation to go in an amicable way? I think that's extremely helpful. Or if you want to translate your email or use it for cultural translation, even because, some cultures they like karaoke, other cultures like other things, right? They like going to the pub, for example, the Irish. So if you were to even translate those customs, I think that's absolutely helpful. It can give you a little boost and be an assistant, but it does not take the place of the real interaction, in which we almost want these cultural intricacies for diversity, for variety, as well as a bit of humor, maybe.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think one thing is to be informed of what that custom looks like or what, the local traditions or perhaps even rules are in order for a person to be informed sort of intellectually. I think there is a unique human value in actually embracing some of those customs and traditions and kind of going with the flow. For instance, if you have, like one part of I think Nordics really value and appreciate like sauna. And then if you kind of
Yeah.
embrace that, and or if if you go to Ireland and you end up going to the pub, or there's another thing, I think the dog race, like that people just
Yeah.
love experience that. And if you do that, or you come to New York and you go to like a Yankee game, it's like an experience that will help you connect with the people that you're working with. And in the past, I think there was this narrative that would dismiss that as sort of irrational because it propagated like this one worldview that is sort of objective, which we all know is not the case. But ultimately, if we want to develop that curiosity and cultural intelligence, one thing is to be informed and have like this cultural card, like this is what you say, this is what's appropriate, this is what's not. But then experiencing that and participating, and that's like a pure anthropological endeavor. And yeah, and I think that's actually quite good for everyone to, again, just from that example that you shared, feel less scared.
Yeah. And I think, A client of mine has a what does she call her? Culture assistant, I think I want to say, or it's agentic AI basically. And the assistant, who also has a name, even though she's a machine and she's AI, is writes basically her content. So this is a high level executive, does a lot of presentations, does a lot of speaking, and works for a global conglomerate, so travels the world. So she will say, and sometimes she even gets into arguments with her assistant, which is hilarious to listen to. But she will say, for instance, recently she traveled to the Nordics, and she's from a culture that's a bit of a high context culture, so very non-confrontational. Whereas in the Nordics, you kind of say it how it is, I think, right? It's a very direct culture. So in her speech, I think it was an opening keynote for some conference, for example, she said the things that she wanted to say, but with the lens of Nordics communication preferences, right? Which is more direct as opposed to maybe bit more non-confrontational and a bit more high level. This was more, well, this didn't work. This project failed, and this is how it failed, etc. But this is what we're going to do about it. Whereas in her culture, you would never say it failed. You would say, this was a great opportunity. Now we're moving on to another opportunity type of thing. So, I mean, it's just isn't that fascinating that you can get an assistant who will say the exact same thing. So the content, the brains of the operation is still you, but then when you actually communicate to an audience that has a different lens of their receiving end of the communication, you actually can cater to them based on their preference and based on their culture. So yeah, same is true for emails, and same is true for any kind of content. So I think it really can help us reach our audience in a way that is authentic and that is connecting.
Yeah. Optimize tone
Yes.
for the specific audience to make it sound more relevant and less, I guess, distractive in a way. I also name my agents, by the way. I think it's like a thing. It's almost like
Yeah.
it makes it more real.
I haven't started naming mine yet. Must. I mean, they have names, like they have robot names, but they don't have real, person names. But maybe going back to the conversation going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation with the names, maybe I should kind of play around with different names for my agents. You're giving me ideas.
What's in the name, right? Isn't it
Yeah.
catchy? So I think we have time for one final question. And again, thank you so much for coming in and all the amazing insights that you share. You often say that the next frontier of leadership is learning to lead human AI teams or augmented human teams.
Mhm.
What does psychological safety mean when part of your team doesn't feel yet still influences how people work? And if you could leave today's leaders with one message or one practice for building truly human AI teams, what would it be?
Yeah, okay. I think you cheated there, Valerie. You said one last question, but I think that's multiple questions. I'll try to be concise. So, yes, I believe in the marriage, if you will, of machine intelligence and human intelligence. So, it's also termed hybrid intelligence. So, in teams of the future, I work with leaders on how they themselves should lead by example by using these tools as augmenters, as enhancers, as we've said, as enablers, and not as sort of generic producers of half baked stuff. That's one thing that, I don't know if it's advice, but it's definitely something that helps with psychological safety as well, because people want to feel valued, as you've said very nicely. People want to feel seen, and people want to add value, and people want to be in that flow state that we talked about. In order to be in that flow state, they need to be producing, creating, ideating, innovating. So give them that space while at the same time equip them with the tools and the intelligence, the augmented intelligence that will actually enable them to do more with more impact. Advice, I think I try to tell my clients and my networks that we shouldn't try to outperform AI. I think it's not realistic, and I think it's also not necessary. I think we should let AI, or whether we let it or not, it probably will happen anyway, but we should let AI go as far as it can And then we should differentiate ourselves from AI. We should learn how to work with AI. We should learn how to be complementary to our AI and how to marry in a figurative sense AI. So that's my advice. Don't try to perform it. Learn how to work with it.
So it's kind of like the successful marriage is a
Yeah.
dance of
It's a
leading
dance.
out and perhaps leaning in where it makes sense for a human to truly lead with the human skills, relying on the intelligence that is built upon the collective intelligence points of humanity, which, how can you compete with that, right? But learn how to leverage that. And that dance, I think, ultimately is a practice to your previous points. Like you have to sort of do it and learn and share the learnings, which we'll continue doing in this podcast and sharing the learnings with others.